Thank you so much for listening to my story. My name is Frances Saldaña. I'm a patient advocate for the Huntington's disease community. So, my personal story takes me back over 40 years when I married into a family with Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is a genetic condition that leads to a progressive degeneration of the brain that affects movement, cognition, and in time, the inability to walk, talk, swallow, and then later to reason. I would describe Huntington's disease like a combination of MS, ALS, Parkinson's, all put into one, and you have Huntington's disease. This is Hector Portillo, my late husband and the father of my children. I was 13 years old in this photo. He was 16. And the occasion was a military ball in high school. At that time, there were no signs of an illness in him, any disability, just by looking at him. Huntington's disease happens to be a well-kept family secret. So full disclosure is very common because of the devastation that Huntington's disease brings to a family. It affects every area of your life, and in time it will impact employment, health insurance, and relationships, which is why it is kept a well-kept family secret. So when Hector was he was, I guess, just right out of high school and starting college. He was drafted in the Army. This was during Vietnam. So he went to his boot camp, and pretty soon he got orders to go overseas. So he called me and wanted to get married. And so in the haste of thinking, well, you know what, he's going to go to Vietnam. He was my childhood sweetheart. He asked me to marry him, and what do you do when you're a teenager? You say yes, right? So we got married and started a family right away. That's what we did in those days. So I had all three of my children within a 7-year period. And I will tell you right now that I lost all three of them within a 7-year period because Hector, the symptoms of Huntington's disease started creeping up in him soon after my third child was born. So after 7 years, had my children, I started worrying about would my children inherit this disease or not. He was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, and in 1989, he was actually struck by 2 cars, and that's how he died. He didn't actually die from the actual progression of the disease, although he was already very symptomatic. It was soon after he died, actually, I could see slight symptoms in my youngest daughter the day of the funeral. She was only 12 years old. And that's when I started worrying about my babies. Were they going to be inheriting this gene? So just thinking about that took me on this terrible journey or nightmare of becoming just running scared, trying to save my children in case they should inherit this disease. And it took me on a journey of becoming a Huntington's disease patient advocate. These are my children. Huntington's disease put me on a path that no young family should ever have to go through. Again, it was soon after Hector died that my youngest daughter, Marie, started showing symptoms of the disease. You can imagine having seen what their father went through, what I was feeling at the time. So, as you can see, Huntington's disease there's a photo of what the brain looks like on the right side, and then there's a normal photo on the left. So it starts destroying, killing the brain cells in the center part of the brain, the basal ganglia. So HD is currently diagnosed based on the presence of motor signs and the extent of their movement disorder. However, the patient is actually dying. The progression actually starts, as what we have learned just recently, probably at birth. But the symptoms are so subtle. So the individual is literally dying, and yet the fact is not realized until the symptoms start in a very subtle way. The result is that the patient struggles with getting a diagnosis, whereas early detection could help improve the quality of life and provide a higher level of care and alleviate a whole lot of suffering for the patient and the families. So the wide impact of the patient's functional abilities, movement, thinking, and psychiatric disorders start long before the inability to walk, talk, and swallow. Once concerns about the patient set in and HD is suspected, doctors may order an MRI, but it doesn't always detect all the damage that has already occurred. So often, this is when the individual could have been properly assessed and qualified for specialized care. This is my son, Michael. He was a strong one, the one that I thought would never inherit the gene for Huntington's. When Michael was in his late teens, he started training under a Scandinavian chef at the Balboa Pavilion in Newport Beach. But in his early 20s, he started demonstrating subtle symptoms of HD. He didn't want to be diagnosed, and he definitely did not want to be disabled. So he fought me from taking him to a neurologist until he just couldn't do anything anymore, and agreed to let me take him to Dr. Hermanowitz at UC Irvine. So, at that point, Dr. Hermanowitz determined that he was disabled and needed to receive some social benefits. I think that what they do at all the social services, that their job is to deny the benefits rather than to help the patient. And I'm really sorry, but that's what I went through with my children. Their job was to disapprove any Medicare and Medi-Cal, whatever they needed. Now, my youngest one, she was fortunate because her dad had been a veteran, so when she was diagnosed, she was able to get some benefits, but it was not that way for my two older ones. So naturally, the families have to do whatever they can to pay for their medical expenses and caregivers, and it's really a struggle until the families, most of them just give up. They don't even want to bother with going to court, fighting social system, just do what they can to care for their loved one. And at the same time, most families just don't even want to disclose the fact that there is Huntington's in their family. So in 2010, our HD community, along with HDSA, the National Office of Huntington's Disease Society of America, we introduced the HD Parity Act to Congress, and it was the sponsor was Senator Gillibrand. So every year, every time a new Congress comes in, for the last 12 years, we have presented this bill, which we pair with what the ALS or community got. We only ask for them to waive the 5-month period for the disabled HD patient to receive SSDI, and also to waive the 2-year waiting period to receive Medicare coverage. So for ALS, it was approved right away, but for Huntington's disease, they just seem to brush it off. In fact, it's never even been brought before Congress for a vote. So this has gone on for 12 years, and you would think that with a patient who has a fatal disability and is not going to be able to walk or talk or swallow, and they're going to die, that they would at least provide that, but no, it still hasn't even gone before Congress for a vote. In the meantime, with Michael, who was still not in a care home, he was desperate to find a job, to live out his dreams and he always lived with the worry of needing to go out and search for a job, and that made him a target for mistreatment from society, from all levels of society. He often was struck by cars. driving to go look for a job until finally his driver's license was taken away from him. So he would use his bicycle to go looking for a job. And one of those times he was zigzagging on the street, actually in the sidewalk, and actually brushed against a pedestrian who was actually an undercover cop. Well, the cop tackled him to the ground, and Michael apologized quickly. He said, "Officer, I'm so sorry. I have Huntington's disease. I can't control my movement." And he said, "Well, where are you from? Where do you live?" Because he was in Newport Beach. He said, "Well, I live in Huntington Beach." He goes, "Oh, so you live in Huntington Beach, so you have Huntington's disease?" He said, "Yes, sir." And that didn't do any good. He apologized. He explained what he had. The police officer handcuffed him and pulled him into jail. Unfortunately, at the time, my husband and I were traveling, so I wasn't able to get there right away. So that really angered me, and it prompted me to think, when is this going to stop? These officers don't know what Huntington's disease is. They don't know how to identify it. I thought about it all night long, and I realized it has to start from the top. Who is the top? It's the chiefs of police. So I researched where they met, where are they then, and it just so happened that they would be meeting 3 weeks later in I think it was in Florida, at the National Chiefs of Police Convention. So I called them and asked them if they could give us a booth so we could do some training to the police officers there. So they agreed. So I quickly contacted other HD organizations, including Help for HD in Northern California. And together we formed a coalition and quickly just created a pamphlet and materials, educational materials, got a booth, and that has been going on now since 2014. They continued with this program called the Law Enforcement Educational Program, LEAP, and educated hundreds of police officers about just what Huntington's disease is, so that when they see someone who appears to be intoxicated or on drugs, they know how to approach them without scaring them and causing them to run, which causes more problems. So it's going to take a plan of action, public policy, and very active participation from HD families and the community to work together and be one voice in order to achieve significant accomplishments in promoting the core principles of patient care. Again, the established structure of healthcare system is often focused on ruling out patients who are already demonstrating disabling neurological and motor skills, but are still able to walk, talk, and swallow, although with much difficulty. Families are left to fend for themselves, doing the best they can in creating fundraisers, coordinating educational symposiums, promoting awareness about the disease. Often families give up rather than having to navigate through the bureaucracy of social services. Court hearings, till they are exhausted from the fight. So a plan of action needs to take place in order for HD population to be cared for the minute they become seriously disabled. Taking advocacy to the next level needs to be made a priority through a coordinated effort at the local, state, and federal government levels to put into law funding that is badly needed for patients' care and initiatives. So in, I think it was in 2001, I was in a peer group that we created a document called Lifting the Veil of Huntington's Disease, because again, like I said, it's a well-kept family secret and very little is known about it by the public. This program was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So the peer group, it was a coalition of doctors, neurologists, social workers, and myself, the patient advocate. This paper was a call to action to public policy makers And we made recommendations to researchers for centers of Medicare and Medicaid services, healthcare practitioners, educators, caregivers, and first responders. And you can still see this documentation online. In 2005, a group of Orange County HD family members and I, along with Dr. Leslie Thompson, Dr. Hermanowitz, and Dr. Marsh, we advocated for an HD clinic at the Movement Disorder Center at UC Irvine, and the dean approved it. So that this established an HD clinic for the first time at UC Irvine. So right here you can see that my daughter, sitting in the wheelchair, has given him a basket, a gift basket, and she was so happy. And Dr. Hermanowitz was so grateful to see the families come together like that in appreciation. In 2007, my oldest daughter, Margie, was invited to speak at a CIRM board meeting at UCLA. I think it was UCLA. Is Melissa here? It was either USC or UCLA. She was now married and had 2 children. She was candid and unscathed in her description of the dynamics taking place with her own little family. And it was really hurtful to hear what this young mom had to endure when her little family felt sad, confused, and ashamed of what their mother was becoming. And the audience that was listening was visibly moved. Right here she's pictured with Dr. Pacifici of CHDI, Hans Kierstead, who was a neurologist or scientist at UC Irvine, and Bob Klein. Bob Klein, as you know, he was the author of Proposition 71 that passed the $3.5 billion bond that created CIRM. And then later, Proposition 14, a $5.5 billion bond that passed, that was passed in 2020. So, right here you see a picture of a mother, with a lot of angst in her, explaining to world-renowned choreographer Donald McHale just about what prompted her to write ballet based on Huntington's disease. In 2007, my oldest daughter, while trying to process with what my family was going through, what their future looked like, would there be a treatment for my children? What would be the worst case scenario for HD, the most probable scenario, and what would be the best case scenario? I reverted back to what I loved to do the best many years back, dance, choreography, and writing. So I started drafting an HD ballet and was successful in convincing prominent and renowned choreographer Donald McHale at UCI to choreograph the ballet for me. It took several years of emails, meetings, conversations, until I almost gave up because he didn't understand the concept of putting a disease into a ballet form. So I finally, when I had even gotten him a CD with the Huntington strand, the sequence of the Huntington gene, and what it sounds like when you put it into a computer, the sounds that it creates. He said it was a beautiful sound. That HD gene, that mutant HD gene is beautiful. He could feel it, he could hear it, but he didn't understand what I wanted. And in my head, all I could see was dancers, this synaptic firing, and then the neurons dying. And to me, I saw it in dance form. But he didn't understand until I finally slumped on my chair and said, it's just that other organizations have a famous celebrity to represent them, and we don't have anybody except for Woody Guthrie. And he stopped. He was walking. As I was talking, he stopped, turned back. This Woody? Woody was my friend. I performed with him with Marjorie Guthrie at the so-and-so ballet in New York. And he goes, he was my friend. He would play while we danced, and he took out a book and read to me a segment where he's describing Woody I don't know if any of you know who Woody Guthrie is. He wrote, or he sang, "This land is my land, this land is your land." He had Huntington's disease. And Marjorie Guthrie, his wife, founded HDSA National in New York once he was diagnosed with Huntington's. And I believe he died in, no, she started when he died in 1967. So he said, okay, let's do it. So the ballet was a 3-act ballet based, again, like on the worst case scenario, the most probable, and then the best case. The worst case scenario was where I was at that time. There was actually nothing, you know. Actually, no. In 1993, they discovered the gene that they discovered that it was in chromosome 4, and then I thought maybe something's going to happen, but still, you know, our patients were all dying. There was no hope, and so that would be the worst case scenario, and that was Act 1, and that is the one he choreographed. You can see that in this picture where the dancers are they're doing an interpretive dance of what Huntington's disease is. In the backdrop, you see the actual telescopic view of the Huntington protein. And then the music was a combination of the DNA sequence and Woody Guthrie singing in the background in between. And we did get permission from his daughter for us to use that music. The most probable scenario is what's happening right now. There's a lot of hope, but we have no cure. We have no treatment yet. We thought we would have had one a couple of months ago because Saldaña was doing they did a clinical trial that actually passed phase 3, but the FDA turned it down. So that's where we are right now. The best case scenario is what I hope for one day, to actually have a treatment, and that's going to be the most beautiful part of this ballet, when you see the dancers, you know, just running across the stage, just leaping, and you know, with little flyers that look like the DNA, the double helix. That's what I envision. So that hasn't happened yet. That's unfinished business. So meanwhile, back at UCI lab, Dr. Thompson was working on induced pluripotent stem cells derived from skin cells that have been reprogrammed back into embryonic-like pluripotent state. They enable the development of an unlimited source of any type of human cells needed for therapeutic purposes. All 3 of my children were skin cell donors, and they used to show off that scar on their wrist like a badge of honor. My youngest daughter, Marie, donated her skin cells on her birthday. This is Marie right there donating her skin cells, and Dr. Hermanowitz is sitting by her. But her birthday was on February 24th, 2009. But the clock was ticking. And even as fast as scientists worked, it just wasn't fast enough. So my Marie passed away that same year. So in 2010, UCI had their grand opening of the Sue and Bill Grove Stem Cell Research Center. So I have to tell you, at the time I actually worked at UCI, I worked at the School of Business, and I remember driving from the School of Business around the campus, and I could see the building coming up. I could see the scaffolds. I could see, it was happening. And I remember my coworker, Serene, I would get so happy every time I see it, and I'd go, woo! And she'd say, Frances, why do you get so excited every time you look over there? And I go, don't you know what that is? She goes, no. I said, that's going to be the new Stem Cell Research Center. I said, that's where they're going to find cures for diseases. That's where they're going to find the cure for Huntington's disease. That's my building. She goes, she didn't know what I was talking about, because I kept my work very separate. What I did in my own time with what I did while I was, you know, on the clock at the School of Business. So what happened was that day I was invited to attend the grand opening. You can see Hans Kierstedt there, you see Bob Pine, Bill Gross, but as I was walking out of that building, and Bill Gross was walking in with his entourage because they had donated millions of dollars towards that building, which is called the Sue and Bill Gross Stem Cell Research Center. Of course, being an advocate, I blocked him. And I introduced myself and told him what I did. And I told him that little story in my little 30-second elevator pitch. And I think he was pretty stunned. But then he went and took the mic, and he repeated what I had just shared with him. And then he turned to me and said, "Frances Saldaña, this building is for you," which is just what I had said. I had always called it my own building. In 2010, no, actually it was in 2012, I co-founded HD Care at UC Irvine. So we are a support organization, very much like a corporate partner. We are under the umbrella of the UCI Mind, but we're all volunteers. We fundraise. We have an annual symposium to educate the public and HD families about Huntington's disease and give them the latest information that we have on scientific breakthroughs. We have an annual gala. We raise funds, and with these funds, once a year we give a grant to the Huntington's disease lab, the Thompson lab, and then we give another part of it to the HD clinic that we started in 2005. So they're not designated funds. They're whatever Dr. Thompson needs for her lab, whatever material she needs, or anything she needs for HD research. For the Movement Disorder Center or the HD clinic, these funds are used for patients that don't have medical insurance and who need to see a geneticist, a counselor, or even to get a blood test, and sometimes even to get gasoline money because they don't have enough money to make it to the doctors. So we've been doing that. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary of the startup of the HD Care, which stands for Huntington's Disease Community Advocacy, Research, and Education. And we created this exhibit, which is now a permanent exhibit at the UCI Mind Museum. And as you can see, it describes from the top when the HD protein was discovered in 1993 in chromosome 4, and then photos of my children and other family members to the right. Some of them who already have HD, some who are at risk. At the bottom, a photo of a family who knew that the mom had HD, and they chose to go through IVF, and actually had these beautiful twins who are now teenagers. I think they're 17 years old now. In fact, Mitch is the father. He's on our board of directors at HD Care as well. And then, of course, it shows all the scientists that are working on HD. So it goes full circle, all for the same purpose, to have a world free of Huntington's disease one day. So here's a photo of the Americans for Cures. We're ambassadors for all the different diseases that we represent. And I see, oh, there you are. And there's Adrian and Ron, who are also patient advocates, ambassadors, and my husband, who's, I think he's in this photo as well. So again, Bob Klein actually started Americans for Cures, and then Melissa, of course, she's always been there. Kind of like, are you like his right-hand person, Melissa? That's what it looked like to me. So it was just wonderful. We've been friends. All of us have formed friendships throughout the years, which goes back over 10 years. And then in, gosh, I think this was around 2010, 12 or so, UC Davis received a huge grant for Huntington's disease research, and of course, we all celebrated all over California. This was funded by CIRM, again, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Oh, sure, yeah. So anyway, so this is a photo of my children, Michael and Margie. And her last wish was to see her brother. He was in a different, in a care home. She lived at home, so I arranged to have them to have him transported to her house. And you know, as it turned out, this actually was her last wish. She just couldn't stop looking at him, and he wouldn't look at her because I know he was trying to hold back tears, so he just looked down, but he knew she was there, and she just kept saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. And a group of us, patient advocates, went to the FDA to appeal for them to put HD research and clinical trials on fast track. They listened. They were very attentive, but things just didn't move fast enough. Yeah, so things just didn't move fast enough, and as it turned out, Margie died in February of 2014. So although research never moves fast enough for our families, they have had a lot of breakthroughs. And my son Michael passed in 2017. So he fought hard to live, but no one survives Huntington's disease. So we have a quilt to remember them, and it just keeps getting longer and longer. Here's a picture of the HD families looking at the quilt. And then again, here's a photo of that one family that decided to go through IVF, which would be so cost effective to go that way than to have people just be born with the mutant Huntington protein. Again, I think we need to take a tip from the way the AIDS organization did it. They collaborated, they joined forces, they were loud, they demanded a treatment, and now there is a treatment. They're no longer dying from Huntington's disease if they can get treatment soon enough, which is what we hope for Huntington's. So there is a lot of power in numbers and collaboration and speaking with one voice. That needs to be done, and closing that gap between what patients go through and how senators and congressional members are responding, which is not really well, unfortunately. But I mean, we just carry on. We keep the faith. We carry on. We try to have fun while advocating for our cause, for raising funds for research and patient care. And along the way, we make time to have, to have some good times with our friends. Right here, there's Ron and Adrian and my husband, and there's my mother with my husband and Margie's bake sale, and they're all fundraisers for the cause. So that's what we do. So thank you so much for allowing me this time to share with you my personal story and my journey with Huntington's disease.
We now have a brief video that Francis has brought for us as well. And after the video, if anyone has a question, we'd like to take one or two questions.
And the purpose of this video is sort of like Back to the Future, because Melissa was asking me, what keeps you going? Well, these are some of my heroes that I've met throughout this journey, who are the reason that I keep the faith and keep going.
I started this game when I was about 4.5, 5. And it's something I've always loved. A fun sport, a really fun sport. Skated pro, that's actually how I got hurt. I'd like to think that the chair is just a temporary portion of my life, and that one day things might be better.
I lived through 3 generations of Huntington's. My late mother-in-law, my husband, the father of my children, and then my daughter, my baby, the youngest one. right there. She wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. She loved children. She wanted to be a teacher. I know I'm going to see my son and my daughter's blonde hair and their snow, and I know I'm going to see that. How's my little guy? No one should have to live through what my children are living through.
It's always a pleasure to welcome our groups to the centre. It's a fabulous building. It's not just a fabulous building, I think, because it looks good and it works well, but really because of the people in it. I think a lot of us study biology do so because we're interested in biology. How does the cell work?
We've never been able to create a human cell. We've never been able to create a cardiomyocyte heart cell. We've never been able to create an islet cell from pancreas to repair juvenile diabetes.
For the first time, we see an opportunity through our research to actually affect patients. The ability to make every cell type of the human body for the first time in human history is an absolute game changer for us.
We use neural stem cells to try and explore whether we might be able to use these as a way to treat Alzheimer's disease.
We're looking into retinal regeneration as a way of treating people with retinal problems.
As someone with MS since 1976, I think that the idea of what's going to happen with stem cell research could be phenomenally successful.
I know from my research group, every year in our lifetime, we want to make a difference in this disease.
UCRI is really at the forefront of translational medicine. We have work that has resulted in the sponsorship of 3 separate clinical trials, at least for neurological disease and injury.
You've probably heard about the research on spinal cord injury that's come out of here, work by our colleague Hans Kirchner for acute spinal cord injury.
Our treatment was recently approved for testing by the FDA, and it ends up being the first human embryonic stem cell basic clinical trial in the world.
But more recently, one of our colleagues, Ali Anderson, together with another colleague, Brian Cummings, developed a treatment for chronic spinal cord injury.
Some of the work in my lab for spinal cord injury now is in a clinical trial, and we're really excited about that.
You see perhaps a rat or a mouse walk again with the treatment you've developed. It's extraordinarily empowering. But I can tell you without a doubt that pales to the feeling of seeing a human treated with these things. It's why we're here. It's why we get up every morning. It's wonderful to see.
I mean, it's pretty widely accepted at this point that stem cells and the building blocks of life. And you can create, you can heal, you can modify just about anything you want.
The other thing we're doing is to use stem cells for transplantation to see if we can protect the brain of an individual with Huntington's disease from either developing the disease in the first place or slowing the progression.
Here's our head researcher at UCI, Leslie.
The researchers at the UCI Stem Cell Research Center, they're not just doing a job, they're truly committing their entire life to saving lives.
One of our other patient advocates, Francis Saldaña, whose family has Huntington's disease, realizes we may not be able to save the children, but let's work towards saving the grandchildren.
I have learned that if you come up with one thing, it trickles through the neuroscience community and gives birth to other ideas.
People support an idea, it grows, it's exponential.
That's how science makes the biggest jumps forward, and that's one of the most exciting things about being right here, right now.
20 years from now, we will not understand how medicine was ever practiced.
Please.
Stand with us.
We're all in this together.
Each voice counts.
Each dollar counts.
Each day,
We get one step closer.
For the millions of lives at stake,
It's a race against the clock.
that's why we need to have the vision and courage to invest.
Aggressively now.
and build on the momentum.
It's already picking up steam.
This is our moment.
This is our moment.
Please support stem cell research.
Support stem cell research.
Please support stem cell research.